Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Eddie Westerman, and I'm serving as your moderator today. Most of us are joining this meeting from around Washington State on the traditional lands of 29 federally recognized Native American tribes and many more Native American tribes that have not yet been recognized by the federal government. Our WEA headquarters building is located on lands where the Coast Salish, Duwamish, Muckleshoot, and Puyallup tribes have all lived. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations, and we commit to continuing to learn how we can be better stewards of the land we inhabit. We believe that education has historically served as a tool for the colonization and assimilation of Native people. As educators, we have a responsibility to share the rich history and traditions of this region's original inhabitants with the students whom we serve. Our meeting today will focus primarily on workplace requirements for schools issued last week by Washington's Department of Labor and Industries, including new details on ensuring health and safety. Most of you are watching this meeting today via YouTube. If you have questions, please send them to wea@washingtonea.org. Please include the topic in the subject line and your name and your local in the message. We will only use first names. We'll share our information first, and then we'll take questions, but you should feel free to send the questions at any time during the presentation. We're recording the meeting today, and we'll be putting that recording on at the end of the link listed here in the third bullet. In a moment, WEA President Larry Delaney will say hello and share updates. Other participating WEA panelists are WEA General Counsel Amy Iverson, Bargaining Specialist Jennifer Silvas, Chief Lobbyist Lucinda Young, Director of Government Relations Jabril Diop, and Director of Advocacy and Organizing Mary Howes. We expect this meeting to run approximately an hour, depending on questions later. As I said earlier, we're recording the meeting and it'll be posted on the WEA website later today. We'll also post a link to the L&I requirements and a checklist and hazard log that your local may be using in communicating with your district as safety questions come up. Please visit the website because there are a lot of resources there for your use. If you can't find the answer to your questions there, please send them to your local president or building rep and they will get them to us. Okay, so that's the housekeeping part for now. Please welcome WEA President Larry Delaney.
Thank you, Eddie. From the onset of this pandemic, WEA's priorities have been clear. Number one has always been ensuring the health and safety of the educators, our students, families, and communities. Racial equity and social justice has been a priority. We need to make sure that we're able to reach those specifically who we were not able to engage with in distance learning last spring. Staffing for students is a priority as well. And regardless of what form school takes, we need everyone to engage, from our ESP members and bus drivers to our classroom teachers and specialists as well. Everyone has a role in reaching out and connecting with our hard to reach students and providing the instruction that's so desperately necessary. We also have had as a priority support for educators. We've seen very few plans yet that ensure that our members are going to receive the training that they need to be more effective educators in this distance learning model. Districts must provide that PD so our members are better prepared. Today's meeting is going to focus primarily on the health and safety aspects and new details about workplace safety that were released by L&I last week. We're going to be talking here about the roles that different state agencies play in relation to school safety and workplace safety, general guidelines around that, focusing on different risk levels, some scenarios, your rights and responsibilities as employees and as educators, and the role that your local union is going to play in advocating for school safety. So to start, I'd like to turn this over to the WEA General Counsel, Amy Iverson.
Thanks, Larry. So I think we're ready for the slides, Samantha. All right, thank you. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to start out by going over kind of who does what in this area. I think there's a lot, there are a lot of different entities who are weighing in and making recommendations, and it's kind of hard to keep it all straight. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that. So first of all, OSPI is responsible for K-12 instruction and education finance. They don't have a role in making health and safety recommendations for the public or schools. Now, the Department of Health, the State Department of Health, provides general health and safety guidance. They are recommendations. They're not necessarily enforceable at the state level, but they provide framework for the local public health officers to implement at the local level. But it's those local public health officers who have the authority to make determinations in their jurisdictions. Labor and industries, and this is what we're going to spend most of our time talking about today. This is an enforcement agency to provide for health and safety for all employees in the state of Washington. And labor and industries is only focused on employees, not on safety of students. All right, next slide, please. All right, so what happens if the school district has some questions? Who do they contact? If it's regarding the employee-related requirements for personal protective equipment or other safety standards, that's Department of Labor and Industries. And districts can request guidance from L&I, and that's one of the things we're recommending later on when we start discussing some specifics. If it has to do with student or public health requirements, that's in the purview of the State Department of Health or the local public health jurisdiction. In terms of requirements and guidance for implementing educational plans and models during COVID, that's up to OSPI. All right, so who has the authority to do what? And what do all these recommendations, how do they all fit together? The governor has the authority to shut down schools or to close a work site through his emergency proclamations. And in fact, that's what he did this March when he ordered that all schools be closed. A local health officer for your local health jurisdiction can also shut down schools or shut down other employers based on health and safety threats. Now, labor and industries also can shut down based on worksite violations that violate worker protections. So they actually have the authority to step in and insist that employers follow their required recommendations. So what we're going to be talking about in a couple minutes, those are all enforceable. Now, a school board can also make a decision whether to shut down or not. But when it comes time for reopening, who has the authority to order when a school will reopen? That's the locally elected school board. And the locally elected school board is not bound by some of the recommendations that have been put out there by the Department of Health. You've heard all about 75 cases per 1,000 individuals and the varying risk levels. Those are recommendations. They are not enforceable. But what is enforceable are these workplace safety requirements when we return to in-person learning. All right, so I am now going to turn this over to Chief Lobbyist Lucinda Young.
Good afternoon. Glad everybody's here. So I'm going to delve into the L&I advice a little bit more in depth. And after I'm done with my section, Jennifer Silvis will be sharing some information about bargaining issues and things your local can be doing. So as we're going through different ideas for safer reopenings of our school, keep in the back of your mind that the CDC has said global school studies suggest that in-person learning can be safe when transmission rates in the larger community are low. But there are a lot of things that have to happen before that could become possible. If your local health officer issues a statement that in-person instruction can begin, a local school board must then consider if they have in place all the requirements so that they can reopen safely. Among those requirements are health and safety plans, procedures for implementing those plans, and specific to the conversation today, health and safety protections for staff and students. Next slide, please. What should be in these plans? First of all, each worksite must have an active safety committee, and that safety committee must make clear a process for how to report health and safety concerns at the worksite. Every worksite must have a trained COVID-19 supervisor, and all employees must know who that person is and how to contact them. The school district must have specific action plans for when a staff or students have to be isolated due to illness while they're at school. They must provide training on the best ways to prevent the transmission of COVID-19. They must let all employees know how to access enhanced PPE and how to replace their protective gear when it's dirty or torn. And they also have to address daily requirements. Next slide. So what are these daily requirements? First, every building needs to have increased frequency of facility cleaning schedules, and this includes a particular emphasis on commonly touched surfaces. Disinfection is required before work areas or tools are shared. So for example, if the students are staying in one place, but the employees are moving, any shared equipment must be sanitized before the next employee arrives. Next, there have to be health checks for all people entering the school building, and these basically include temperature checks and attestations that the person doesn't have COVID-19. Hand washing stations and sanitizer must be available everywhere in the building, and masks must be worn by all people in the building. Keeping in mind, while these protections are required for workers, they are predicated on the assumption that virus transmission is reduced when non-workers also wear at least a cloth face covering. Social distancing of 6 feet must be maintained, and that 6 feet is measured shoulder to shoulder according to the CDC. And some school districts, when they're setting up classrooms, might find it saves a little bit of time if they just measure 6 feet from desk edge to desk edge. That way, if the kids are a little wiggly in their seats, they're still maintaining 6 feet. Students should be placed in cohorts. Now, these cohorts are not every kid in the building. There's no such thing as a 700 student cohort. The cohorts are how the kids are placed into their classroom where they're spending the majority of their time. So when you think of the fact that those students must be at least 6 feet apart, those cohorts will be somewhat smaller than the normal classroom size. And those students might at times have to move together as a cohort. And also, specific required PPE must be provided by the employer for all employees based on general classroom and small group individual instruction. Next slide. So just a quick review of some of the key points of the updated L&I guidance that was released late last week. The overall health risk in a typical K-12 in-person instructional setting is classified as low risk. There are scenarios in every school setting, though, where the risk might be slightly lower than that and most certainly higher. In low-risk situations, staff may wear a cloth face covering. In medium-risk situation, L&I's long-standing guidance allows for several different protection options, including a face shield with a cloth face mask, a surgical-style mask, a hobby desk mask, a KN95 mask, or a KN90 mask. And in extremely high risk or high risk situations, an N95 respirator or equivalent should be used. If an employer cannot reasonably obtain an N95 mask, Then they must provide a face shield plus an FDA-approved surgical mask, procedural mask, or a KN95 mask until that respirator can be obtained. And also keep in mind, N95 respirators or equivalent protection are only required in high risk or extremely high risk situations. Next slide. And continuing along with general requirements, some assumptions are made. These requirements are assuming that activity is conducted indoors unless otherwise specified, that people who are required to wear a cloth face covering are in fact wearing that mask. It's predicated on the assumption that virus transmission is reduced when non-workers also wear at least a cloth face covering, and also that there is no known positive case of COVID-19 in that particular workplace. If you're exposed to someone without a mask for some reason, it must be less than 15 minutes. And also mask wearing will happen where additional controls are not present. So for example, if additional barriers, proper ventilation or distance can't be kept, then minimum requirements are increased or decreased according to what the LNI recommends. And just to remind you once again, your school district can get consultative services from LNI, from their Division of Occupational Safety and Health, also known as DOSH, and they will be happy to look at all plans, to come out to buildings and make sure that everything is set up in a safe manner and that the proper protective gear is available. Next slide. Okay, so one of the things the LNI did do is to try to provide clearer recommendations. And so they've divided your transmission risk into 5 basic areas. And I want to briefly run through those and what types of masks might be required. So negligible transmission risk is for work sites that have very controlled admission, mostly for people working alone, and where 6 feet can constantly be maintained unless someone is getting up to leave that particular work site. So again, this would be for people working in their classroom alone or somebody in an office by themselves that does not expect to have any interaction with other people. In these places, regular cloth mask is safe, and if there's for some reason you cannot wear a cloth face mask and you have doctor's orders, then a face shield that has the cloth drapes on it that you tuck into your shirt are okay to use. Moving to low transmission risk areas. These would be structures or classrooms where 6 feet of distance can be maintained and everybody is able to wear a mask. Again, 6 feet could be broken intermittently, for example, when you're passing by a student's desk or somebody gets up to leave the classroom. Here, a reusable cloth face covering is acceptable, again, keeping in mind that everybody in the room should have one on, or the face shield with drapery is also acceptable. Then moving on to the medium transmission risk, and this will cover most of our work sites that have small group or sometimes individual student work. And this is also where it might not be possible to maintain a 6 foot distance at all times. And so here, a face shield with a cloth face covering would be accessible, but it would probably be best to have non-cloth disposable masks such as a dust mask, KN95, or other non-approved foreign system style filtering face pieces, or non-FDA approved procedure masks. Now, moving to the next slide, please. The last 2 categories of risk. High risk transmission would be where you are working in close quarters where 6 feet of distance is not maintained and the job task includes staying close together. So this would be, again, some small group work or individual work, and might most likely be in our special ed classrooms or classrooms where we're helping students who have various other kinds of disabilities. Here, the mask requirements does increase. So there you have several options. First, you can do an elastomeric half or full safe respirator with particulate filters, or a powered air purifying respirator. This is not as tight fitting as the RN90 mask and does not require fit testing. Or you can use the N95, R95, or P95 masks. Keeping in mind, these must be fit tested, and that includes a medical assertion that is appropriate to wear the mask and specific training for putting it on and taking it off, and a clean shaven face. Or a face shield plus an FDA approved KN95 mask, surgical mask, dust mask, or procedural mask if a respirator cannot be reasonably attained. And lastly, extremely high risk transmission areas, which LNI said would most likely be your health room or the isolation room where students and staff would be sent if they think they are coming down with COVID after they've already come to school. And here again, the elastomeric respirator with particulate filters is okay. LNI would prefer the FDA approved surgical mask or healthcare N95 filtering face peak respirator. A face shield plus FDA approved KN95 mask, a surgical mask, a desk mask, or a procedural mask with that face shield would be okay until the N95 mask is available. And again, the N95 mask requires specific training and fit testing and no beards. Next slide. So the LNI guidance that came out last week, first we would recommend that you take some time to really look at it and read it carefully. It is pretty readable, and it will answer many of the questions that might be popping up in your mind. So it does cover some specific areas in our school setting. First of all, in classroom or office working alone pieces, general group instructional setting, which we would think of as students in a classroom with the educator in front. It covers individual and small group instructional support settings, and our office settings, both offices within a school building or those that are non-school based, such as your administrative offices. Transportation, drivers and staff. Our drivers do, and our staff on buses do have to be masked, as do the students. And LNI strongly recommends that seats near the bus driver are empty with no students in them. And if a school district decides to test students at the bus stop, the driver does not do that. The driver stays on the bus, and the district will have to provide staff who can do that outside of the bus. In our food service areas, there is also specifics there. In general, when it's just the food service staff preparing the food, and they can generally maintain the 6 feet of distance, the cloth masks work. Our health and isolation rooms have very specific requirements, as we've already gone over, including the district and building plans about how you get a student or adult safely to that isolation room, that they're not located next to a lot of passing areas, and what has to happen when somebody says at work, I think I'm sick with COVID, what kind of cleaning has to take place. The specific guidance also goes into two subject areas in particular, band and choir. For band, it limits the types of instruments. Band can only be stringed instruments or percussion, no wind instruments, and they strongly recommend that it be held, that if you are pulling a group of students together to perform on those instruments, it be outside. Choir may not occur in person, period. No singing, period. So no singing in choir, no singing in general music. There are organizations around the country that have suggested other things might be safe, but L&I has specifically said no singing, period. Physical education also requires masks, has to be maintain the 6-foot distance, and has a little bit of specific advice when you're outside. And distribution centers, which right now can be places where families come to pick up food or pick up their lessons for the week, those types of things. Again, 6 foot of distance, try to set systems where they come pick things up outside. They do not have to come in the building, and proper mask usage. Next slide. And just to review a few things quickly, cloth face coverings are described in the Department of Health guidance, and part of mask use is knowing how to put them on and take them off, which is part of the training districts must provide. Respirator use that is required must comply with existing rules, including medical surveillance, fit testing, training, and a written program. Written respiratory protection program templates can be found on L&I's website. Tight-fitting respirators, these are the N95, must be fit tested and the wearer must be clean-shaven. There is an alternative, the powered air purifying respirator with a particulate filter. It does not require fit testing, and so some districts may choose to purchase those. And for all risk levels, different face coverings and respirator options are included in L&I's which mask for which task. WEA has those on their site, and you can also quickly Google that. Next slide. And now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Jennifer, who will take you through bargaining and organizing at the local level to better help protect you and your students. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucinda. So one of the things to keep in mind in regards to these L&I regulations, requirements, is that this is a floor for where we're at. And as a union, we have the ability to join together and unite and put our power forward to ask questions. And if you remember back to Amy's first couple of words and slides, there's local decision making. So the only person and the only group that has the power to open schools is school districts. And so it's up to us to make sure that school districts are actually looking and thinking about all of these pieces that Lucinda went through and all of the things that are combined in the L&I guidance as we go forward. So keep that in mind. And when I know that most of you may have frustration and different things, make sure you're reading, staying up to date in regards to these different guidelines that are there, and ask those questions. So that's the first piece. Be willing to ask, how are we dealing with this? How are we dealing with safety committees? Who's on the safety committee? Do I know who's on the safety committee? Ask those questions. And if you don't have the answers or you're not getting the answers, that's when you want to make sure you're asking the union and we're working together, because we can bargain things that are above this, but we have at least a floor to work from. The other thing to keep in mind is L&I, as Amy and Lucinda shared, it's about keeping employees safe. L&I is not an expert in the field of education. And so all of you know what best practice looks like, whether that's best practice for how to maintain a school bus and the routes, whether that's what needs to happen in a cafeteria or even in a classroom. And so we have to remember that the good part about this guidance is it gives us a frame. And what we have to do now is make sure districts are applying that frame and implementing it correctly. And that's going to take, in some places and instances, bargaining. So look at that, work with your local, and ask those questions, because when we organize, we'll be able to get further. And one of the ways we can do that, and a tool that we've put together, it's available on the WEA website, is a checklist. So if you can go to the next slide. So we have a worksite safety checklist. And I know that most of you probably can't read this right now, but it is available on the website. And it goes through all of the things that are part of the guidance from L&I in a way that helps you check and say, is my employer, the district, providing me with all of the things that are going to make a safer environment for me to work? When it's not happening, when one of these things doesn't happen, we have a list of things for you to be able to do. You're going to want to contact and notify the site supervisor and the safety committee and let them know about that. When we think about school pre-COVID, we've all experienced that running out of hand soap, paper towels, things like that. So we know that there's going to be, this is part of what gives everyone angst. We know that in the past, there have been problems. How do we know it's not going to happen again? So this is to give you that place and be able to know where to go. And every time you bring those problems up, we want to make sure it's getting notified with the union and that you're keeping a written communication or record. We are suggesting a worksite log, and that is also available on the website. By using these kinds of tools, when that unsafe condition continues, then there are ways that we can address that. If it's a violation of the agreements that we've reached, we may end up filing a grievance as the union. If it is not meeting the standards L&I has set, we may end up filing a complaint with the Department of, I always do this one, the Division of Occupational Safety and Health, that's DOSH. And then the last thing is, it might be important for our community members to know what is going on and how we can raise awareness of what it is that our members are, what our district is asking us to do. Because when we think about best practice and we think about this L&I guidance, there's going to be some places where that doesn't jive. So if I think about my time as an elementary teacher when I used to teach 3rd grade and I needed to help a student, for me to stand 6 feet away from that student and help them would have been next to impossible. So we know that there are going to be different situations where we're going to need to be going in there and advocating and explaining to the community, school boards, and others about why it is we believe particular supports need to be made that may be above or enhancements to what is here. And if they don't want to provide that, we're going to have to be willing to organize and to be verbal and share what it is we're being told to do and whether or not that's a requirement. So I'm going to turn this over to Amy to talk a little bit more about what you do when there is a problem so that you don't get yourself in trouble.
All right, thanks, Jen. So Jen talked a little bit about what happens when you've got a concern about safety in the workplace. The first step is to make sure you know who that COVID supervisor is at your work site and raise the safety concern with that person. You should also contact your local association to let them know that there's a problem, and hopefully it'll be resolved by the district quickly. If not, we can look at filing grievances under the collective bargaining agreement and any memorandum of understanding. It's also possible to file a complaint with the Division of Occupational Safety and Health. As it relates to bringing in DOSH, as we call it, to investigate an unsafe workplace, you do have the right to refuse to perform dangerous tasks when certain conditions are met. But the first thing to keep in mind is you cannot leave the job site. In order to claim protection under the state law, you must remain on the job site until you are released by your employer. Okay, so next slide. So what does it mean? It has to be a reasonable belief that that these health standards are not being met. It can't be a way to harass the district or disrupt work. A reasonable person would agree. And there isn't enough time to fix the problem through district channels. So when that happens, and for instance, let's say there's no PPE for you, no masks provided whatsoever. First of all, you got to ask the employer to correct the hazard by going to the COVID supervisor. Ask the district to allow you to do some other work while they're looking at fixing the problem, and let them know that you're not willing to put your health and safety at risk until they fix it. And again, stay at the work site unless you're dismissed. Next slide, please. All right. And you also, it's important to know that you can't be retaliated against for exercising these rights. You are guaranteed a safe working environment, and you are guaranteed to be free from discrimination or retaliation for raising concerns. That means they can't demote or lay you off, assign you to a different assignment or shift, take away seniority, or reduce your pay or earned benefits, blacklist or threaten or intimidate you. All right, but the other thing to keep in mind is this is the state agency coming in to investigate. The overall goal is to get the district to comply with the L&I requirements. So, and there also might be additional protections that you are entitled to under the collective bargaining agreement. So it is critical that you involve your local association building rep and president when you've got these concerns, because it needs to be an integrated plan for addressing safety problems. You know, because the other thing, just to be totally frank with you, there is no really quick way to address these problems. DOSH isn't going to just, once you call them, order the district to shut down. There's going to be an investigation. That's why some of the pieces that Jennifer was talking about, organizing and working to push your district to behave appropriately is more than likely the best method here. So I'm going to turn it back to Jen to talk a little bit about what the role of your local union is in all of this.
So as you, next slide. So as we look at this, as the union, we can look at finding ways to protect those rights like Amy was just talking about. Keeping in mind that you can't leave the work site. It doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be right there with kids. If they don't give you PPE, that's going to be a challenge for you to be able to necessarily do those different pieces. And know that our local leaders are constantly working on this to bargain and to advocate that districts are doing the right thing. I think it's also important to note that these requirements, although they came out last week in a document, that was for clarification. Most of these are things that the district has known about and has had available in terms of what they needed to do. And our locals have been asking these questions from the beginning. We also want to look at how can we protect our profession. We know what best practice is, and we need to hold districts to that. And when they're not allowing us to do what is right and good for kids, we need to make sure that others know that. So when we're not able to actually provide proximity because they're not giving us the higher level of PPE, because they're saying that you're low risk. You're low risk if you're staying 6 feet away from those kids. If you are not staying 6 feet away from your students, you are not low risk. And the Department of Labor and Industries was clear about that. That's what we have to work with, and we have to be able to push that and show why what best practice. In a kindergarten room, I can't quite imagine standing 6 feet away from students on a consistent basis. So keep that in mind. And that when we work together, we're going to be able to make it louder and stronger for those decisions to get made. So, Larry?
Thanks, Jen. I appreciate that. And I want to thank Amy and Lucinda for that background information as well. And we'll probably be hearing a little more from them. Now we're going to go get some questions. So I'm actually going to turn it over to Eddie, and let's see what we have from our members.
Thank you very much, Larry. So we're receiving a lot of questions. We're going to get to as many as we can. And I'm going to ask some of these questions in buckets, so it might take a little bit for people to answer. The first question is, what if a student or staff member gets sick during the day? What do we do right then with the people who are near those? That would be Lucinda, maybe?
So keeping in mind that every school building is supposed to have a plan, a safety plan, and they must have an isolation room on site. So the student or teacher or employee needs to go to the isolation room as simply as possible. Back in the classroom or the site where they might have gotten sick, students need to be removed. Space has to be cordoned off where the student was, and that does have to be disinfected. And when they're in the isolation room, there is somebody there who's trained and specifically assigned to that work and knows what to do then. We'll follow through on the district requirement for notifying parents and others who might have been in the classroom. So again, the safety plan for each building must be clear on this. The process must be well explained to all adults in the building, and the isolation room should be prepared and ready to go with a trained, prepared staff person there to take care of that situation.
Thank you. Okay, stick with us, Lucinda, because I'm gonna ask you a bunch of questions. I know you covered some of this, but I'm going to ask a bunch of math questions all in a bucket, and we'll see if you can review and answer some of these. So Tammy, a physical therapist in Lake Washington, says her colleagues in Tacoma and Federal Way are required to be fitted for N95 masks. She hasn't heard that happening in her district. So she wants to know, what does that mean that the district must provide us with the right mask? So she's asking, does she get a new mask every class period? Does she get one every day, once a week? Another member, Mayumi, says she works with preschoolers who are not required to wear a mask. Does that mean she's going to get an N95 mask? One question we have is, can the district force me to shave off my beard? And several members are also asking if it's okay to wear a face shield without a mask. One member, Kathy, is concerned that if we do that, then students will follow suit. So that's your bucket, Lucinda.
Okay. Just quickly, no employee can waive their responsibility to wear PPE. So all employees in the building must wear the appropriate PPE for the task that they're doing. So plastic shields by themselves will not protect you at all. So that one's quite easy. You cannot wear simply a plastic shield. You must have a mask on under it. And if you are in a situation, for example, speech language therapist, where your student needs to see your mouth, then you can wear the plastic shield with the cloth drapes appropriately tucked in. So that's that question. N95 masks, again, are required if they're available for the high risk and extremely high risk. So if you are working one-on-one with a student who cannot wear a face mask and you cannot maintain 6 feet of distance, then that would be the appropriate mask. You must be go through a medical process to make sure it works for you, and it has to be fit tested. And again, you cannot wear a beard. There are some alternatives to the N95, which we went over briefly, and the document goes into more detail on. So beards are an interesting question because it is an individual's choice to decide if they want to have a beard, and if it is for religious reasons that you grow a beard, then you will need to work with your local and your administrator to determine what your assignment is, and is there an alternative to an N95 mask which requires no facial hair. So I think that's it in a nutshell.
That's it. You got a bunch of them. I'm doing it in buckets because we're getting a lot of similar questions. So this next batch of questions, Jen, is going to go to you. So I will get them out right now. We've got a few questions about the role of custodians and the impact constant sanitation might have on students and staff. So here are my few questions. First off, what kind of PPE will custodians need? What are the cleaning standards? Are custodians the only people responsible for cleaning and sanitizing the buildings? Are they expected to clean the isolation rooms? How often will bathrooms and hallways need to be sanitized? Those kinds of questions. Another question in this bucket is, will teachers and students be responsible for cleaning and disinfecting surfaces, tools, equipment between each class, for example, in a woodshop setting, or is that going to be up to custodians? People are concerned about shared lunch and meal times, that kind of, in between lunches. And the last group of that is, as far as the impact of cleaning in general, Ben from Issaquah is wondering about the effect that disinfectant spray being used to kill viruses might have on students and staff. He says that before school closed last March, custodians at a school were using a spray that gave him and many others upper respiratory reactions. So he's concerned about students and staff with asthma or other sensitivities. Ben says his district is forcing teachers to choose between hybrid or being reassigned or putting on leave. So that's that batch, Jen.
Okay, there's a lot in there. So ultimately, these fall into a category of having a safety plan for the cleaning part of it. And the CDC has some very good guidance out there in regards to what needs to be part of that. And it covers everything that is on here is something that is in that particular guidance. And so if you go to the CDC website, it's going to give you the specifics. But the high part of it is that if cleaning is happening in the regular way, just regular routine cleaning is considered low risk for transmission. And that should be, happening daily. The actual bigger concern for those people who are doing that cleaning is not actually COVID related. It's related to the cleaning products. So it's important that you are checking what those requirements might be for masks and additional higher level protective wear for those things. Disposable gloves for all things, for all your cleaning. If that hasn't been the case in the past, it should be now. And in addition, disposable gowns and or coveralls, something that can be put on, taken off when you're done doing any kind of cleaning in those higher risk isolation pieces. There is very clear, specific guidance on how that cleaning should take place, and there's additional training that custodial staff should be given prior to being asked to clean an isolation room and or mitigate after someone has been removed from a classroom setting or some other place in the building due to possible exposure to COVID. So I think that kind of covers that first part. In terms of who's going to be responsible for cleaning, there is certain cleaning that's going to have to be taking place all the time beyond just your routine cleaning. So this is the high touch items or shared items. And the materials and tools to make that happen, again, are going to need to be more than likely shared broader, because if we're moving rooms, adults, you have to clean all of those surfaces that are shared. And you're going to need to know how to do that. So that training and the tools for doing that are going to need to be given to anyone in that situation, whether it's the cafeteria and we're sharing tools, distributing things, all of that stuff. And then lastly, the EPA has a lot of information about those toxic chemicals or the high impact chemicals that are part of cleaning and sanitizing. And that guidance, again, should be reviewed because it talks about not going overboard, hitting the right sweet spot for how you clean things so that the things are getting cleaned without overstimulating people's health and respiratory systems. So the idea of spraying and not having a time for the air, the ventilation to work to spread out and clean out the space should be taken into account. There are really specific guidelines on what can and cannot be used in a school. So you can't just bring your own Clorox wipes to the school. Everything needs to go through the school district and be there. If those things are not being provided, that would be a violation of the L&I guidance, and you would want to start your process of asking for those supports.
Thank you. Next question. Mark, an elementary school music teacher from Kennewick, says he knows L&I says don't sing together indoors despite what other studies say, but what about singing together outdoors? Also, are schools required to test and attest what ventilation rates are? A follow-up to that is, what if the school where you work is very old, has horrible ventilation, hasn't had good air quality in the past 20 plus years, with a lead custodian who thinks COVID is a hoax? Can the union test the air? Lucinda?
Okay, I hate to say it again, singing, the answer is still no, even outside. L&I is clear on that. Unfortunately, there have been examples of groups that have tried to sing since COVID started and people have gotten sick and some have died. It was not in a school setting, but no singing. Okay, so testing the air, the school district is the one who can bring somebody in to have the air tested. If you believe it's not safe and your building refuses to have it tested, then your local union needs to help with a grievance. We have many school districts that do not have up-to-date HVAC systems that have all the proper filters. So it is important. That is why it's critically important for the school district to make sure that every employee has the proper mask as designated by L&I, and that they are worn, and that students, unless there is some specific reason in law that they cannot, are wearing masks. And if they can help by having windows open and other ways to get fresh air in, that will help. So if the air is stale and doesn't move in your classroom, it is something that the safety committee needs to address and figure out what they can do about. As far as clean masks, this was from the first question. Cloth masks must be cleaned daily, so your district has to have a process for you to turn those in at the end of the day. The other medical masks, the N95s, the KN95s, have particular cleaning requirements. The KN95s, et cetera, can be worn for 1 day. And if you take it off, you need to be trained on how to take it off properly and put it back on. They should not be placed in a bag on your desk and sit there waiting for you the next day. Some hospitals were forced to use the high-risk masks more frequently than advised because they couldn't get them. In a school, your district must provide the appropriate mask for you every day.
Thanks, Lucinda. We have several questions about social distancing, size of cohorts, and whether classrooms and staff in those classrooms are low risk or medium risk. Leanne, a middle school teacher in Moses Lake, wants to know if our districts or building are not conforming to the 6 feet social distance. How do we get it fixed? She says the 6 foot social distance is being measured inconsistently. Her district is going center to center and her buildings are arguing it should be shoulder to shoulder. Max asks, who determines the level of transmission risk categories a group that a class belongs in? Jen?
So in regards to the measuring of social distancing and shoulder to shoulder, if you have a district that is saying it is something different, what that would do is it would change the risk factors, right? So those risk factors have been decided by and laid out for us by L&I. And if they're not able to meet that 6 foot consistently, then that would put you in a medium risk as opposed to a low risk, or even medium could move to a high if you were in close proximity all the time for people. So it's important for you to keep that in mind. And again, this goes back to you ask the questions, and if it's not happening, then we would ask for that consultation with L&I. We'd ask the district to get a consultation with L&I to clarify that. If they're refusing and then they are saying that you have to teach in that environment that is closer, then they have to provide you the higher level of equipment. If you are going to bargain the higher level equipment, that would be part of what your union would do. And this is why we would suggest that you make sure that you're using your safety committees at the building level, that you are communicating when there are problems to that safety committee and the safety supervisor, and that you are pushing that information back to your union when the district is failing to meet those standards.
Thanks, Jen. I'm aware that we're coming up on our hour. Larry, do you want to keep going? We have lots of questions still coming in.
So yes, let's continue. For all of our members who are on here right now, I recognize that your time is valuable too. This is also being recorded, but I think it's important, Eddie, that we continue. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to keep going then. A bus driver from Northwest Washington says he is not confident they have enough bus drivers to be able to social distance on his route, especially after furloughs. What should he do if they try to put too many kids on his bus? Amy.
Yes, the new guidelines from L&I do have specific information about transportation. And the guidelines, unfortunately, do not require social distancing of 6 feet for students on buses. They make general recommendations for safer practices, such as limiting the number of kids, having kids sit with their cohort members or family members, keeping the windows open in the bus, but social distancing does not have to take place. Now, what does that mean for bus drivers? Well, in most circumstances, according to these L&I guidelines, it's a medium risk category, which means you've got to have more than just a cloth mask. If you are in close proximity to students, such as if you drive a special ed bus, you are likely going to fall in the high risk category, which requires a higher level mask. But again, these are floors, not the ceiling. It's possible that your local association may have bargained requirements for social distancing on buses or otherwise to limit the number of students on the bus. So it's important for you to reach out to your local association and or raise any concerns you have about overall safety with your safety committee and COVID supervisor.
Thanks, Amy. Next question is for Lucinda. Some nutrition service workers say that their administrators are planning on using the cafeteria for classroom space while they're supposed to be preparing a meal, lunches in a safe manner. Wouldn't that change their risk profile, and could they demand better PPE?
So this is a little bit depends. If the students are having their classes in the cafeteria and it's and you are preparing the food in the kitchen part, and there's that distance of a minimum of 6 feet, then the masks that you should be wearing, if you are in a smaller kitchen and you can't maintain 6 feet, then you're considered the medium risk, and you should all have those masks. But if the students are not right where you are working, for example, you're not putting lunches together at the same table where they're learning, that shouldn't impact you. But again, your school safety plan should address that, and asking the questions and having clarity on exactly what is that going to look like will then determine the exact mask you need.
Thank you. Adding on to that a little bit, I think you're going to answer is going to be it depends again. But here's a teacher who says, I work with special needs kids. I can't tell if according to these guidelines I'm medium, high, or extremely high risk. I have some kids who spit and bite, and I have another question about diaper changes. So can you talk about that in terms of the risk level?
So if you're in a special ed classroom where you can generally maintain 6 feet and everybody, including all the students, can wear a mask, then you would be considered to be in that low risk classroom, except I've never been in a special ed classroom where you can maintain 6 feet. And we know some of our students in those classrooms can't wear the masks. So it will be important for you to have the high quality, high risk mask on. And if the student spits or bites, at a minimum, the bite guards are necessary, and there must be proper cleaning materials that you can use if they happen to spit. And you will need to meet with the IEP team and your administrator to make sure that it is the best place for the student to be if they have those challenges. The last part of the question, remind me again.
We have a question about changing diapers, but I think.
Okay, changing diapers. Thank you. All righty. So it's interesting. There's not real specific guidance on that. Changing diapers would still be happening in a private location, and the student would need to be masked if possible, and gloves and the proper protections that you would have been taking previously to that. And again, if that student cannot be masked, then the high risk mask, the KN95, the surgical mask with plastic shields, et cetera, would be appropriate. And I think it would be important, without very specific guidance, to have a conversation with the safety committee about cleaning the area after the student has had their diapers changed. That needs to be done immediately and carefully. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, Lucinda. Are we expecting, I know we're expecting students and staff to stay home with COVID symptoms, even though they may be indistinguishable from flu. What does that mean in terms of sick days for staff? I throw that to all of you.
So what I would say is that one of the things that locals have been working hard on over the summer and until now, and will continue to work hard on, is to clarify leave language so that when people are experiencing COVID, they are able to use additional separate types of leave to provide for that. It does not necessarily take into account the fact that somebody who might have come to work with the sniffles is now going to be asked to stay home. There are rules on how much sick leave we can bargain and how much we can carry over. What I do know is that most of the agreements that I have seen, a lot of them talk about in situations when people run out of leave, that there are conversations with the union on how to help people. So there might be other ways for us to address that. And none of us have ever been through a pandemic, and we are going to come up with these types of things that we're going to have to answer as we go forward.
Thank you. So Barb in Gig Harbor wants to know WEA's plan for getting the message out to our communities that students should not be back in buildings until all, not some, but all of the safety measures are addressed. She's concerned about air filtration systems and says that with pressure, districts are willing to comply with the easy elements of safety, but wonders how WEA members can ensure that our work environments are truly safe and that disinfecting and sanitation is happening routinely. I think that's for Jen.
Sorry, my mic was stuck. So Barb, I completely understand that desire that we all have to have some kind of confidence in the fact that we're going to work in a safe place. The hardest part of this pandemic has been that the concept of safe, I'm not sure exists in the same standards and in the same way that we might have before. What we can look at from this guidance that has come out and what locals are working hard to address is to create the safest environments that we can possibly create for our members and the employees who are there, the students who are being educated. In terms of air filtration systems and things like that, some of those are higher cost items, and it is going to be a tougher, bigger lift. In terms of the safety of PPE being available, having the right disinfecting and sanitizing tools, those are things that we should be able to make sure happen. And I think that it's up to us to help families understand what is in place and what is not in place in some of these districts. And again, this could even be something that is in one district is being handled differently building to building based on the age of some of our buildings. I know we have some places that have they're older HVAC systems, so they don't have the same pieces. We're going to have to be thinking creatively and working with districts to figure out how do we put other pieces in place to make that happen. So again, we want to make sure we're asking the district lots of questions. How are they planning on making these things happen? And when they don't have an answer, we need to be willing to make everyone aware that they don't know the answers, and standing together so that that can happen and we're not leaving anyone alone.
Thank you, Jen. So we remind you to visit the WEA website where you'll find answers to a lot of these questions. And we also ask that you send questions that you have to your local president or your building reps, and they'll get those questions to us, and we'll get the answers on the website as soon as we can. We'll also add the meeting that we are recording today onto that website. And finally, there are just probably some questions that we may not be able to answer because the situation is so fluid, or questions that we may not be answered today, but we might be able to answer tomorrow. So I'll turn this over to Larry now as we finish up for today.
Thank you, Eddie. And I want to thank all of our WEA panelists who were with us here today. Eddie, thank you for hosting. Jen, Amy, and Lucinda, great job. This is, I also need to make sure I thank Joel, our ASL interpreter. Thank you, Joel, for being with us here today as well. The work that you all are doing in providing support for members really can't be measured. Eddie just said, we are in a pandemic, or I think Jen actually said this, and none of us have ever attempted to operate in this environment before. So I just want to thank everyone with WEA who is just going above and beyond to help serve our members. I need to also make sure that I thank each of you. Our members are doing amazing work in a climate of chronic uncertainty. And for that, I want to thank you. You're working longer hours than ever before. In many instances in communities where you're feeling unfair pressure to put yourselves, your students, and your families at risk. And we recognize that. And we're going to do everything we can as a union to ensure that you all are as safe, your families are safe, your students are safe, and your communities are safe. Janie White was experiencing some technical difficulties. I think many of us know about that in this virtual world that many of us are working in, but we're continuously inspired by the stories that we hear from you all about your work. Please know that we're going to continue to do everything that we can to support you all through these uncertain times. So thank you for participating today. Just a reminder that that this is being recorded. Talk to your colleagues. Please share this with your colleagues. And if you have further questions, please send those to wea@washingtonea.org, and we'll do our best to get those answers to you in a prompt and timely manner. So thank you so much. Stay safe, be well, wear a mask, practice social distancing, and we'll see you all soon. Good night.